Mr. Shields, help us now. People are questioning. What are the steps that all first responders, and in particular the police, should take in such circumstances where someone has died?
Well, that's correct, Cliff. Unless it's absolutely clear, for example, with a shooting or where there's a report there's actually been a murder, any sudden death is initially treated as suspicious. The fact is that with any crime scene, you have to get it right first time, and that's something that I've said to officers over years and years. Get it right first time, because the scene of a crime will only exist in its original state once, and therefore it is so important that you do absolutely everything correctly, that you record the scene correctly and gather as much information as possible, because once the scene is gone, that's it, there's no going back. That means that the first officer on the scene has some very serious responsibilities. That may well be a uniform officer, and the person there, first and foremost, is really to determine whether that person is alive or dead. But of course, a police officer can't do that. Sometimes it might be totally obvious. If it's a decomposing body, quite clearly the person is dead. But if the person it may be breathing, it's important that officer establishes, is the person alive, and to get medical attention there as soon as possible. Because clearly the police first priority always is to preserve life. And once that has been done, it may be that we're moving the victim to the hospital as soon as possible. If, on the other hand, the medical assistance arrived and a doctor declares the person is dead, then the scene will be processed. That's very, very, very important. That means securing the scene. If it's in any way an unexplained death, which means it could be murder, it could be suspicious, or it may be suicide, it may be natural causes. But if it's unexplained, it must be treated in such a way that it is a crime scene. And that means preserving that scene, ensuring that nobody goes near to the body, that nothing is touched, that every effort is made to preserve it until such time as scene of crime arrive with an investigating officer, and then they will begin the process of going through some very clear steps. As I said, you'll never get the scene back, so one of the most important things will be is to photograph the scene, to take sketch maps, to make a videograph of the scene, to gather all of that evidence, to look for anything which might be related to the deceased around that crime scene. They're really the first steps that will be taken.
So in an instant case where it's the crime scene is now in a house, in a room, the members of that household are not permitted to go there.
But once the police have arrived, and if they've assessed that it, as I said, it's an unexplained death, then yes, we would keep everybody from that room. We'd even keep, nosy senior officers or other police officers away from the scene. The only people that would go into a house, which would be cordoned from the outside, there'd be a uniform officer on the outside of the house. The house would be unoccupied, emptied of anybody in there, and then they would keep a log for anyone going in there, from the investigator, scene of crime, and only critical people involved in the investigation will be allowed into that scene. And when they go into the scene, they will be dressed accordingly in order that they do not shed any of their own DNA or anything else from their bodies once they go into that crime scene to contaminate it. So every precaution will be taken. As I've said, the important thing is when it's not clearly a murder investigation, in other words, there's not a knife or multiple gunshot wounds, one cannot be too careful. One has to treat it as an unexplained death, treat it as a crime scene, because afterwards, if one finds out that, in fact, it is natural causes or some other incident, then it's easy to wind the thing down. But it's very, very difficult once you've created a situation where the crime scene or the scene has been trampled on to ramp it up again later on back into a crime scene, because one tends to lose so much evidence.
You said that they should not be allowed in, and if they are allowed in, they must be dressed accordingly.
Absolutely.
What do you mean by that, dressed accordingly?
Well, dressed accordingly means that they would wear a suit, it's normally a white suit, covered headgear as well to prevent hairs or anything else coming from the body. And then you would wear guards overshoes, all of which would be taken out of a package, would already be sterilised, so that no DNA or other evidence can be transported into the scene.
So if as you say, Mr. Shields, that every scene of an unexplained death is treated as a crime scene, and effectively you're saying that the officers are effectively working backwards from that premise to satisfy themselves if this is indeed a crime committed or person died just naturally, so we move on. Is every are police personnel trained in the basic response in a scenario like that?
Every police officer in the world, I've said this so many times, standard operating procedures around so many aspects of policing, they are international standards. One doesn't have one standard in one country and one standard in another. Everything I've said to you applies to Jamaica, United Kingdom, Canada, United States, anywhere in the world. The same protocols have to be followed, because if they're not followed, then, of course, we can get to scene degradation, loss of evidence, and possibly even a loss of a case as well in extreme circumstances if the evidence is tampered with. And don't forget, there's also a question of chain of custody. That means that anything that is removed from the scene, that there must be integrity to the exhibits. That includes the body. That would mean that one officer who perhaps found the body would then accompany that body to the mortuary, where it will be sealed, and that officer would go back again in order to identify the same body for the purposes of a post-mortem. So chain of custody is very important, particularly in relation to the victim, but also anything else that's found at the scene has to be treated with the utmost care in order that we do not lose that chain of custody and have it challenged to the court at a later date.
Have you ever seen a situation where someone has been said to have died in their sleep, then found to have been shot multiple times?
Shot multiple times?
Yes.
Absolutely not. No, that's just beyond the realms of ridiculousness. For gunshot wounds, it's very, very clear that there would be entry and exit wounds, or entry wounds at least, probably exit wounds, depending on the caliber of the bullet concerned.
Mm-hmm. And if you were on this case, some of the basic questions you'd be asking of your investigators who went on the scene and the medical team?
We're talking again in general terms?
Yes, in general terms, yes.
Can you repeat that question just so I understand?
You are the senior investigator. You are in the shoes of the lead investigator. This happened 6 weeks ago. Now you're learning that this was indeed, through a post-mortem, a woman who was murdered. Yes, 3 bullets to the body. What would you be asking of your team?
Well, I'd be asking questions of myself, because if I'm the senior investigating officer, or even a more senior officer, I would have been asking some very basic questions long before that. It wouldn't be 6 weeks later, because all of the questions I would be asking would be on the morning of arriving at work, speaking to the officers at the scene and going through every single part of my checklist to ensure that such a catastrophic error, if it had occurred, could not occur on my watch.